This endgame comes from the training game between Botvinnik and Rabinovich, with Botvinnik on the black side, showing very convincingly that in endgames with knights and rooks, sometimes you can win when the opponent doesn't have any obvious weaknesses, and the material is even. So in this position, it seems that, well, white should be doing fine. The material is equal, all the pawns are connected, he doesn't get mated right away, but it turns out there's a very significant flaw in his position, and Botvinnik highlights that flaw with his next couple of moves. So this maneuver, rook e1 and then rook to e2, highlights a bit of a lack of harmony in white's position. His pawn structure on the king side is such that the second rank is weakened, and the knight and the king are a little bit discoordinated. So for now, the knight is pinned, which means that at some point, if the white rook leaves the fourth rank, white may threaten to win that knight with knight g4, knight e4. The rook on the second rank is also very powerful in that it attacks the queenside pawns, and if you compare the two rooks, the white rook is attacking things on the second rank. Sorry, the black rook is attacking things on the second rank, but the white rook can't invade onto d7 because the knight is guarding that square, and black's king is very safe behind the f pawn. So this minor difference in the position of rooks and kings and pawn structure gives black a very significant advantage. And in fact, right now, white doesn't have a good way of keeping the pawn, because if he goes, say, a4, then just black begins to attack it with rook to b2, and if rook d3, then knight comes to e4, and the pin becomes really annoying. White actually tries to find the best way out of this trouble, but he still has to give up a pawn first. So white decides to give up the pawn immediately, but at the very least he manages to trade off a couple of pawns on the queen side. So now if black takes on c5, then white's probably going to play rook a4 and attack the a pawn. So black has to do something else. Like in many similar cases, and like in the game Karas Botvinnik, Botvinnik decides that it's better to keep the knights on the board in this endgame. So he could have taken on f2 and allow white to take on e5, but here black's knight is much stronger than white's knight. It has an outpost in the center, and white doesn't have such an outpost. It's difficult for white to trade off these knights. So for example, if he goes knight to d3, then rook e2 is probably going to win, and the knight can't go to g4. So this knight is just going to be, in the long term, it's going to be better than the white knight. So as we know, the knight on the edge of the board is never well placed, but there was just nothing better for this white knight. So this move takes away the last good square that this white knight had on f4, and now black threatens to play king g6 to support the g5 pawn, and then he just wants to play rook to h2 and simply win that knight, because if it goes to g1, then rook g2, knight comes back to g3, to h3, then rook takes on g3, and just this knight is going to be trapped. It doesn't have any good squares, so white kind of has to go desperate just to free up that knight. So the material in this position is very limited. There's only 3 pawns the black has against 2 of white's pawns, but the quality of these pawns is quite different, because white's pawns are isolated and they're not going anywhere, and black's pawns are all connected. And also very important in this position, the black knight is doing a good job at protecting both pawns on f6 and h6, whereas the white knight is basically stuck on the edge of the board still. The best thing it can do is give up itself for only 1 pawn, which is of course not enough. So here the game becomes fairly sharp, because there are pawns racing on both sides of the board. And the very important factor here becomes that the white knight isn't really a good piece for stopping the black f pawn. And even though some precision is required with very accurate play, Botvinnik manages to find the right continuation. Here black had to foresee that his pawns are going to be stronger than white's b pawn, and he actually allows white to promote the pawn and to win the rook for the pawn, but it turns out that the 3 pawns in this position are stronger than the rook. This is a common tactical idea. When the pawn attacks the knight on the first rank, it can promote either to g1 or to f1. So the only thing white can do is really just guard the first rank and give up this knight. This is the key point of Botvinnik's play. It turns out that white can't really move the king closer to the f pawn, because this knight on g3 creates some sort of barrier. The only reasonable square for this king is to go to f4, but then black can take on g1, and when rook takes on g1, the knight e2 is a fork winning the rook, and with the knight and extra pawn, black's going to win. So white can't really do anything, and in the meantime black can advance his king and win with those 3 passed pawns. This is a pretty remarkable position. Black's plan is simply to advance the h pawn, and there's nothing that white can do, and because of that he resigned. The game is an illustration that a badly placed knight can be a really important liability in such endgames.